They thought he was just a washed-up actor. But 5 minutes later, a long-buried executive order resurfaced, and everything flipped upside down. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The gavel hit the desk a little too hard, as if Judge Lancaster wanted to remind everyone who owned the room. A murmur ran through the courtroom, reporters shuffling their notepads, a few camera shutters clicking the gallery, and an audible snicker from the attorney's table. At the center of it all, Arnold stood still. No lawyer beside him, no papers in his hand. Just him, his broad frame wrapped in a simple gray blazer, and that worn leather folder he'd carried in like it held something sacred. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Schwarzenegger," he said, drawing out the syllables as if mocking the name itself. "This is a court of law, not a movie set. If you have legal representation, they should be speaking on your behalf." Arnold said nothing. His eyes were calm, but they didn't blink. The prosecution attorney, a sharp-jawed man named Kelly Drayton, smirked and stood. "Your Honor," the respondent has insisted on defending himself. "I believe he thinks this is some sort of heroic monologue moment." Laughter rippled across the courtroom. One juror even smirked. The judge didn't stop it. Instead, he waved his hand and said, "Let him entertain us, then." Still, Arnold didn't speak. Not yet. He slowly placed a leather folder on the table in front of him. The sound of it landing was soft, but it seemed to hush the room more than the judge's gavel ever could. A boy in the back, maybe no older than 15, looked up from where he was seated with his school group. His teacher leaned over to whisper, "That's the former governor, but he's no lawyer. This won't go well." Drayton circled like a man smelling victory. "Your Honor, this is about the illegal obstruction of a development contract ratified by the State Council." Mr. Schwarzenegger personally halted construction, citing moral objections, as if the law bows the sentiment. He turned to Arnold. "Unless he can prove legal precedent or official exemption, this is textbook interference." The judge nodded. "Well then, Mr. Schwarzenegger, this is your stage, apparently. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Arnold finally moved. Not a word yet, just a slow undoing of the folder's buckle. From it, he pulled a single sheet of paper, a photocopy, yellowed at the edges, but sealed with something official. He slid it forward toward the bailiff without a word. The judge raised an eyebrow. Drayton scoffed. "Is this some fitness license? Or perhaps a signed photo from his Hollywood days?" Still, Arnold remained silent. The bailiff handed the document to the judge. Lancaster adjusted his glasses, scanning the page. His face didn't change, but he stopped smirking. He read the page again, then a third time, then slowly, very deliberately, set it aside. "What is this supposed to be?" he asked, quieter now. "This Executive Order 1092B. Arnold finally spoke. "Signed on May 17, 2006, as governor, to protect state-leased land used for youth rehabilitation programs. Includes the site in question." The judge leaned back, almost incredulous. "You expect us to believe this forgotten document from almost 2 decades ago holds legal weight?" "It was never repealed," Arnold replied. His voice was calm, but not cold, steady, like someone reciting something carved into stone. Drayton chuckled nervously. "Even if that were true, which I doubt, no copy of this order exists in the state archives. Believe me, we checked." Arnold reached back into the folder and pulled another item, a thin videotape. Mini DV. He placed it on the table, next to the folder, and looked at the judge. "You'll find the footage of the signing there, along with the list of programs affected. I kept a personal copy." Judge Lancaster looked like someone who'd just been handed a puzzle with too many pieces. He glanced at the court clerk. "We'll verify this." But before he could speak again, Drayton exploded. "Your Honor, this is absurd. We're entertaining a theatrical stunt because this man once ran a state. The law isn't a movie, and nostalgia isn't admissible evidence." Arnold turned to face Drayton directly. "Neither is arrogance," he said. "But here we are." The room fell silent. The laughter from earlier had vanished. The reporters scribbled faster now. The school group, was leaning forward. Then came the sound of slow clapping from the back. Just one man, an older gentleman with thick glasses and a cane. No one recognized him. He stood. "I was at the center," he said softly. "The one on that land. I was 17. He saved my life." The judge banged the gavel. "Sit down, sir, or you'll be removed." But it was too late. The words had already settled over the courtroom like dust on a forgotten book. Something ancient had been disturbed. Something undeniable. Arnold looked back at the judge. "This isn't about land. It's about memory. Theirs, not mine." For the first time, Judge Lancaster didn't respond with sarcasm. He simply nodded once slowly and recessed the hearing. And as the crowd stood to leave, Arnold remained at the table, hand resting on that old folder. The cameras panned, hoping for some grand gesture, some final quote. But he gave them none. Only silence. Because sometimes that's louder than anything. The courtroom air felt heavier after recess. The laughter had faded, but its echo lingered in Judge Hawthorne's smirk. He adjusted his robe and glanced down at the stack of neatly typed documents from the plaintiff's table. Across from him, Arnold sat alone, scribbling something in a notepad with a dull pencil. No legal team, no assistants, no polished briefcase, just a weathered face, an old man in a plain gray suit, and a defiant quiet that seemed out of place in the Federal District Court of Los Angeles. "Mr. Schwarzenegger," the judge began, his voice cutting through the murmurs, "will proceed with plaintiff's case. You'll have a chance to respond afterward, assuming you're still representing yourself." Arnold nodded slowly without speaking. At the plaintiff's table, a young, ambitious attorney named Jordan Ross stood. Slick hair, perfect smile, Harvard degree. He adjusted his tie, glanced at his client, Triers Global CEO Nathan Bell, and approached the bench like a man about to take a victory lap. "Your Honor," Ross said, "the facts are clear. Mr. Schwarzenegger's foundation violated Triers' exclusive rights to distribute the Genvax 12 medical device. We have the patent. We have timestamps. We even have correspondence proving he attempted to manufacture a similar version overseas, circumventing our licensing agreement." Judge Hawthorne nodded, pretending to look interested. "Very well. Proceed." The lights dimmed. A projector flickered to life. On the screen appeared a technical schematic, layered blueprints of a cylindrical medical injector. Roth's voice filled the room as he pointed with a laser. "This," he said, "is Triers' proprietary design, registered and protected under U.S. Patent 8824. Filed March 7, 2022. Our client invested over $40 million in its development." A second slide popped up, a grainier version of the same device, labeled with the name of Arnold's Humanitarian Foundation. "And this," Roth said, spinning toward the jury, "is what Mr. Schwarzenegger's team began producing just 2 months later in a third-party facility in Slovenia. Same dimensions, same internal structure, even the same cartridge locking mechanism." He paused for effect. "This is not just infringement," he said. "This is theft." Arnold remained still, eyes fixed not on the screen but on the floor, just beneath it. He tapped his pencil twice on the desk. Once slowly, once harder. "Mr. Schwarzenegger," Judge Hawthorne said, "you'll be given time to respond, but for now, please refrain from commentary." "I haven't said a word," Arnold replied, his voice low and dry. "I was referring to your body language." The judge replied. Laughter trickled from the gallery. One woman near the back shook her head and whispered, "This is embarrassing. Why didn't he bring a lawyer?" Roth continued his presentation with confidence. He called his first witness, Eleanor Drake, lead engineer for Triers' design team. She spoke with rehearsed precision, confirming every technical overlap. Roth nodded with each answer, like a conductor cueing a symphony he'd already played a dozen times. By the time she stepped down, it felt like a formality. Arnold scribbled something else in his notebook, then folded the page over slowly. His face betrayed nothing. The next witness was worse. Triers' IP attorney, who broke down the chain of custody for the patent, the dates, the contract clauses. To the jury, it was dry. To the court, it was damning. By noon, even the stenographer looked bored. During the lunch recess, Arnold stepped outside alone. He didn't check his phone, didn't speak to the reporters circling the courthouse steps, just stood near a pillar and looked up at the sky, as if counting the minutes in cloud movements. Back inside, as the judge called the court back to order, Roth introduced his final exhibit, a full-size prototype of the Genvax 12. Sleek, futuristic. He held it like a trophy. "This is a result of years of protected innovation," he said. "And here's the invoice from the Slovenian factory, dated just 6 weeks later, ordering 300 units of a nearly identical device under the Schwarzenegger Foundation's name." Judge Hawthorne raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Schwarzenegger," he said, "how exactly do you plan to explain this?" Arnold stood slowly. "I'll explain it tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow?" Hawthorne asked. "I'd like to request a one-day recess," Arnold said plainly. "I need to gather the rest of my defense." Roth objected immediately. "Your Honor, we followed every procedure requirement. He's had ample time to prepare." "I've been preparing for months," Arnold said, his voice steady. "But there are still pieces coming together." "You mean stalling?" Roth snapped. Arnold turned to him. "No, I mean strategy." A murmur rippled through the gallery again. Judge Hawthorne exhaled and leaned back. "I'm tempted to deny the request," he said. "But I'm curious." He banged the gavel. "Recess granted. Court will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp." Roth glared across the aisle as Arnold sat back down, calm, unshaken. Outside, reporters swarmed again. "Mr. Schwarzenegger, are you surrendering the case? Will you finally hire a legal team? Is Triers right about the stolen design?" Arnold didn't respond. He reached the end of the courthouse steps and turned toward a black SUV waiting at the curb. As the door opened, a woman in her early 30s stepped out, sharp eyes, lab coat folded over her arm. "Dr. Celine Navarro?" one reporter asked. She didn't answer. Arnold looked at her, nodded once, and handed her a folded piece of paper from his coat pocket. Then, without a word, he disappeared into the SUV. Inside the vehicle, he finally spoke. "Everything ready?" Celine glanced at the paper, then pulled out a flash drive from her coat pocket. "It's time," she said. He nodded again. "Then tomorrow we fight." The courtroom was packed before the clock struck 9. Even the air felt tighter, like the walls themselves were bracing for something. Reporters filled the gallery. Jurors sat straighter. People who had barely paid attention during the first 2 days now leaned forward with quiet anticipation, their coffee cups untouched. Whatever was about to happen, it wasn't going to be business as usual. Arnold arrived 10 minutes early, alone again. Same gray suit, same calm face. But today, something in his posture had shifted. Shoulders squared, eyes sharper, chin slightly lifted as he took his seat, without looking left or right. Roth sat across from him, sipping espresso, chuckling with his co-counsel. "You think he brought that same notepad?" he whispered. "Maybe today he'll draw us a picture." Nathan Bell, the CEO of Triers, grinned beside him. "He's got nothing. Yesterday was a stall. Today's the funeral." Judge Hawthorne entered right on time, robe flowing like a curtain parting for the next act. He tapped the gavel once. "Court is now in session. Mr. Schwarzenegger, you may present your response." Arnold stood slowly, adjusting the mic in front of him. "Your Honor, before I speak, I'd like to submit 3 new exhibits to the court." He reached into his briefcase, an old leather one, scuffed along the edges, and pulled out a flash drive, a manila folder, and a sealed envelope. Roth's chair creaked as he leaned forward. "Objection. We were given no prior notice of these materials." "They were gathered in the last 24 hours, Arnold replied evenly. "All verifiable, all relevant." Judge Hawthorne raised a brow. "Let me see them." The bailiff walked them over. The judge opened the manila folder first. His eyes scanned the top sheet, then widened just barely. "Proceed," he said. Arnold turned to the jury. "Yesterday, you were shown a blueprint," he began, "of a device called Genvax 12. You were told it was invented by Triers. Protected. Untouchable. But that was only half the story." He nodded toward the screen. A bailiff connected the flash drive. The projector flickered on again. But this time, the image that appeared wasn't a blueprint. It was a scanned letter dated 2017. The letterhead read, Vienna Bioethics Symposium Department of Experimental Therapeutics. Arnold continued, This letter, written by a professor named Jacob Klein, outlines a prototype for a pressure-assisted vaccine injector. It's nearly identical to the one Triers claims as their own, and it was presented publicly, on stage, 2 years before Triers filed their patent. A murmur rose in the gallery. Arnold clicked to the next slide, a grainy photo of a younger Dr. Klein holding up a crude model of the device, smiling. Then, a video clip. No sound, just footage from that same Vienna symposium, dated, time-stamped. The crowd applauding. The camera zoomed on the injector. The very same dimensions. The same locking mechanism. The same silhouette Roth had tried to burn into the jury's memory. Roth jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this could be fabricated. There's no chain of custody. The envelope, Arnold said, cut him off. Still calm. Open it. Judge Hawthorne opened the envelope and pulled out a notarized affidavit. His eyes danced quickly through it. Then slower. Then still. This appears to be from the Austrian National Archives, he muttered, confirming that this footage and letter were submitted as part of a government-sponsored research grant, dated, verified, and older than Triers' patent. Arnold looked straight at Roth. So unless your company is in the habit of inventing things 2 years after they've already been publicly unveiled on another continent, I'd suggest we all reconsider who's stealing from whom. Gasps now. A woman in the second row dropped her phone. One juror shook their head in disbelief. Judge Hawthorne leaned back in his chair. Mr. Roth, do you have a response? Roth's mouth opened, then closed again. Nathan Bell whispered something frantic in his ear. We were unaware of this prior disclosure, Roth said stiffly. Our engineers assured us. Arnold interrupted again. There's more. He changed the slide. Now came an internal email sent from a Triers development executive to their legal department. The subject line read, Prototype Similarity Vienna Concerns. The date? 3 months before their patent was filed. Arnold didn't even need to explain it. The silence said everything. This email, he said, was obtained by a whistleblower. Someone who worked on your team, Mr. Bell. Someone who felt your company was suppressing prior art to falsely claim ownership. Bell slammed his hand on the table. This is a setup. Arnold looked at him, eyes cold. You mean like setting up a humanitarian organization to take the fall for saving lives with cheaper, open-source design? Judge Hawthorne banged the gavel. Enough. Mr. Bell, sit down. Mr. Schwarzenegger, continue. Arnold took a step closer to the jury. My foundation didn't profit from GenVax. We didn't sell it. We distributed it for free to children in war zones, to refugees, to villages where no Triers representative has ever set foot. You call that infringement. I call it justice. The words hung there, heavy. One juror wiped a tear. Another adjusted their glasses, blinking fast. Arnold turned to the judge. I rest my case. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Judge Hawthorne nodded slowly. We will resume tomorrow with final arguments. As Arnold returned to his seat, Roth stared at the screen, pale. Nathan Bell sat frozen, fists clenched, his empire beginning to fracture in full view of the public. Outside, a reporter whispered into her mic. What just happened in that courtroom may change everything we thought we knew about this case and this man. That night, the clip of Arnold in court spread faster than Triers' marketing team could control. No music, no edits, just a raw, unfiltered video the moment the Vienna documents were revealed. The camera caught everything. The shift in the jury's expressions, the stammering of Roth, the silence from Nathan Bell. Millions watched it, not for the legal twist, but for the dignity of a man who never raised his voice, never bragged, never broke. Just presented the truth and let it stand on its own. It was enough. By morning, the story had gone global. Former Governor dismantles biotech giant in court. Schwarzenegger's quiet victory. Truth has a bodybuilder's posture. Hashtags flooded every platform. And with every share came questions triers couldn't answer fast enough. Who was the whistleblower? Why did their patent mirror a European prototype? And why had they targeted a nonprofit that gave medicine away for free? At the courthouse, the atmosphere changed. When Arnold walked in, he no longer felt like the outsider defending himself. Reporters didn't shove microphones in his face anymore. They gave him space, watched him like something was unfolding, and they didn't want to miss it. Some nodded respectfully. One cameraman actually lowered his lens as Arnold passed. Inside the courtroom, the jury returned more alert than ever. Even Judge Hawthorne's tone had shifted, less impatient, more measured. But the biggest change was the absence of confidence on the other side. Roth looked like he hadn't slept. Bell didn't speak to anyone, just kept typing into his phone, his jaw tight. The court reconvened for closing arguments. Roth went first. He tried to reframe the narrative, emphasizing technicalities, timelines, corporate procedures, but his voice faltered. At one point, he knocked over his water. At another, he forgot a juror's number and had to backtrack. It wasn't just nerves. It was the unraveling of a story no longer holding under scrutiny. Then Arnold stood. No papers this time. No slides. Just him. He didn't walk to the center. He didn't look at Roth or Bell. He looked at the jury. Sometimes, he said slowly, what's legal and what's right don't match. And sometimes they do. When they do, when truth has a chance to breathe, we have to make space for it. We don't bury it in paperwork. We don't package it. We don't patent it. He paused. We protect it. Every eye in the courtroom was on him now. I didn't come here to win, he continued. I came here because children needed help. And someone thought profits were more important than that help. That's why this matters. He nodded once, then sat back down. The courtroom remained still for several seconds after. The judge dismissed the jury for deliberation. As they exited, some glanced back at Arnold. Not because he was famous, not because of his movies, but because in that moment, he had spoken to something they all recognized, something bigger than patent law or corporate protection, something human. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had formed, not protesters, not supporters, just ordinary people, nurses, parents, a man in a wheelchair with a sign that read, "My son got that vaccine." A young woman holding a photo of her late brother, lost before the nonprofit brought supplies to their village. Arnold didn't stop for interviews. He walked through the crowd, nodding politely, shaking a few hands. No speeches, no slogans. But then, someone stepped forward. A teenage girl, maybe 15, nervous, shaking slightly. She held out a notebook. "My mom said, 'You saved me,'" she whispered. "They gave me the shot after the flood. We didn't have anything, not even a roof. But they had that injector. And it didn't hurt. It didn't scare me." Arnold looked at her, gently took the notebook, and signed a single word, "Hope." Then he handed it back and continued walking. The camera zoomed in, but no one said a word. Meanwhile, inside Trier's headquarters, chaos was unfolding. Stocks were slipping. Board members were meeting in emergency rooms. Bell's assistant had just handed him a single page. The internal memo Arnold had revealed in court, now verified and leaking online. The whistleblower's identity hadn't been confirmed, but it no longer mattered. The public saw the truth. And truth, once seen, doesn't go back to sleep. In private, Roth exploded. We should have settled. We should have buried it before it reached court. Bell didn't answer. He stared at the wall. On the courthouse steps, Arnold paused before getting into his car. He turned to look at the building one last time. This place had never been built for men like him. Immigrants, outsiders, quiet fighters. But today, it had been reshaped by someone who never asked to win, only to be heard. And for the first time in years, it felt like maybe that was enough. The jury was out for 6 hours. No one left the courthouse. Not really. Even those who went home kept one eye on the news ticker, one ear on the notification tone. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had doubled. Some brought folding chairs. Others held umbrellas against the light drizzle that had started just past noon. Nobody chanted. Nobody yelled. They just waited. Inside, Arnold sat quietly in the hallway outside the courtroom, flanked by no one but a young legal clerk who had volunteered to help translate some of the older documents from German. She said nothing, just handed him a thermos of coffee and sat beside him. At one point, she leaned over and whispered, "I called my mom. She remembers your campaign visit to our town in '03. She said you looked tired, but your handshake was firm." Arnold smiled. That sounds about right. When the clerk reemerged with the word, the jury was ready. The building seemed to shift. It wasn't loud, but it was immediate. People straightened up. Phones dropped into pockets. Even Judge Hawthorne's entrance came with an energy that hadn't been there before. The tension had become physical, stretching from row to row, bench to bench. The foreman stood. In the matter of Trier's Biopharma versus Arnold Schwarzenegger, we find in favor of the defendant. A gasp, not cheers, not applause, just one collective release of air. Then another beat. In the matter of counterclaim damages filed against Trier's Biopharma for fraudulent misrepresentation, intellectual property theft, and interference with medical distribution, we find the plaintiff liable on all counts. Now the silence fractured. The woman with the flood photo clutched it to her chest and sobbed. The nurse in the back covered her mouth. The man in the wheelchair let out something between a laugh and a cry. Even the reporters hesitated before racing to type, unsure whether to look to their cameras or simply look. Arnold did not move. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. He only turned slightly toward Roth, whose face had drained of every last color. Bell looked at the ground. The judge called for order, but the gavel wasn't really necessary. Outside, the crowd began to swell forward, but Arnold didn't step onto the stairs right away. Instead, he waited near the side entrance. He was looking for someone. She came forward slowly. A woman in her late 30s slight frame, hair tied in a tight bun, wearing a gray blazer 2 sizes too large. She carried a manila folder. Her hands trembled as she stepped closer. "You don't know me," she said quietly, "but I worked in the regulatory team. 3 years ago, we ran simulations for a rollout in Asia. I saw the numbers. I saw the flag patent. I filed internal reports. They disappeared. My supervisor warned me not to push. So I waited." Arnold looked at her gently. "Until now." She nodded. "When I saw you the defendant, I realized this would be my only shot to clear it." He extended a hand. "What's your name?" "Elena Vargas." "Ms. Vargas," he said, "you just helped change lives on continents we'll never set foot on. You stood up when it counted." Elena lowered her eyes. "I was scared." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," Arnold said quietly. "It's what you do after." By the time Arnold stepped outside, the crowd had grown beyond the barricades. Someone tried to hand him a microphone, but he shook his head. Instead, he stepped forward, held up the signed court order, and let the cameras do what they do best. No speech, just proof. Proof that truth sometimes walks slow. That justice doesn't always look like a gavel or a flag. It can look like a whisper, a signature, a document no one thought would see the light. The aftermath hit fast. Within 24 hours, Trier stock had dropped 42%. Board members resigned in tandem. Nathan Bell issued a public apology and stepped down. Roth deleted every social media profile he had ever made. But it wasn't revenge. It wasn't about their downfall. It was about the shift. Other nonprofits began receiving direct support. Medical patents were re-examined. Public scrutiny grew sharper. And somewhere in a small village in Cambodia, a mother was handed a cooled injector kit from a relief truck. She didn't know who Arnold Schwarzenegger was, but her son stopped coughing by nightfall. A week later, Arnold received a handwritten letter. It came from a 10-year-old boy in Arkansas. He had watched the entire trial with his father, who was recovering from surgery. The letter read, "I saw you not yell when they lied. My dad said that's real strong. I want to be strong too." Arnold didn't respond publicly, but he framed the letter and placed it beside his Mr. Olympia trophies. Not because it mattered more, but because it reminded him that legacy isn't measured in titles. It's measured in who learns from your silence. 3 days after the verdict, Arnold received an envelope with no return address, sealed with a stamp from the California State Archives. The handwriting was familiar, tight and exact, as if written by someone who still used fountain pens for the weight of history it carried. Inside was a single card, off-white, embossed with a gold emblem of the governor's office. Below it, a note in blue ink read only, "Let's talk. You earned that much. D. No time, no place." But Arnold understood. The meeting wasn't arranged through staff or press. It was old school, a quiet call to a mutual acquaintance. A time was set for late evening, after hours, in the back of a shuttered civic building overlooking the bay. The building once housed economic forums during his time as governor. Now it stood empty, waiting for demolition. Fitting. When Arnold stepped inside, there was no security, no entourage. Just Diane Harrow sitting in the middle of the dimly lit room, arms crossed, heels off to the side. She didn't stand up. "I thought I hated you," she said without preamble. "For years." Arnold didn't answer. He took a seat across from her, leaving a respectful space between them. "You bulldozed legislation I spent my whole early career building. You vetoed my clean tech subsidies. You replaced my environmental chief with a venture capitalist." She took a breath. "And yet, I watched that trial. Every minute." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were memos, signed statements, anonymously sourced but detailed. Whistleblowers from inside triers who had tried come forward during her administration, but were silenced. One memo had her own signature stamped in the margins, with a note in her handwriting. "Not now. Too risky." "I buried it," she said quietly. "I thought I was protecting the system. But what I really protected was my image." Arnold looked up at her, not with judgment, but with something softer, like someone who'd learned the same lesson once, maybe twice. "Do you want to change that now?" he asked. She nodded. "I've submitted a formal recommendation to open a statewide review panel for corporate medical trials. You'll be named to lead the ethics advisory." "You're asking me back into government?" "I'm asking you to do what you just did," she said. "But this time, without waiting for a courtroom." He didn't smile. Not right away. But he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The letter from the boy in Arkansas. He laid it on the table, without a word. She read it, and for the first time in the entire conversation, Diane Harrow looked away. "You know," she said, voice lower now, "when I ran against you, I used to think you were just a body with charisma. A man who flexed and smiled and somehow made people believe he understood policy because he understood pain." Arnold raised an eyebrow. "Was I wrong?" "No," she said. "You were right. I just didn't like that you got there without asking my permission." A pause hung in the air like breath before a storm. Then she added, "But I see now, legacy doesn't ask permission. It just shows up, uninvited, like truth." The meeting ended without ceremony. No handshake, no photo op, just two former adversaries walking out opposite doors, carrying new weight in old hands. But that conversation set something in motion. The next week, Arnold appeared on a quiet panel in Sacramento, surrounded by former regulators, ethics professors, and a single representative from the WHO. Cameras weren't allowed. It wasn't for show. It was groundwork. They called it the first Assembly on Global Medical Transparency. Some said it wouldn't stick. That was just theater. But weeks later, when Arnold flew to Geneva for a closed-door summit, he brought more than charm. He brought signed statements from over 30 whistleblowers, 5 legislative co-sponsors, and a quietly powerful ally in Diane Harrow. This time, no one called him just an actor. It wasn't about the title anymore. It wasn't about muscle or fame. It was about what survived the silence. What emerged when the lights dimmed and the world moved on. And still, Arnold kept the letter. He never replied, but he framed it again, this time beside the ethics committee charter he'd helped write. On the back of the frame, in his own hand, he wrote, "Strength is what you lift. Legacy is what lifts others when you're gone." The ballroom was packed. Marble floors reflected soft golden light from crystal chandeliers that hadn't been dimmed in over a century. The Grand Civic Honors Gala, hosted only once every 5 years, was never just a ceremony. It was a stage. For ambition, for legacy, for silent rivalries dressed in tuxedos. The guest list was surgically precise. Governors past and present, foreign envoys, industry giants. And tonight, the whispers weren't about the honorees. They were about the man who had turned down the highest award at the last event. Arnold had refused it quietly back then. No statement, no press release, just absence. And that had said more than any speech ever could. But this time he was here. He entered without fanfare. No red carpet, no spotlight. Just walked into the side door as the string quartet swelled into a soft overture. He wore a black suit. No tie. American flag pin on the lapel. As if to say, I haven't forgotten who I served. Only a few people noticed at first. Then a murmur spread. By the time he reached the main hall, 1,000 eyes had turned and a silence folded into music like breath being held. On stage, a young woman adjusted the mic. She was no celebrity, no senator, just the daughter of a man whose name never made headlines, Dr. Eli Kamara, the clinical scientist who had tried and failed to warn triers about the fatal side effects. He died of a sudden aneurysm before his memo ever reached the board. Some called it coincidence. Others weren't so sure. My father believed, she began, voice steady, that science without ethics is just polished cruelty. That progress without accountability isn't progress at all. Tonight, we honor those who protect not just truth, but the courage it takes to tell it. She didn't mention Arnold by name. She didn't have to. The screen behind her lit up. Aslo montage. Footage from the trial. The moment Arnold stood and asked the CEO a final question that made the courtroom go still. Images of warehouse doors being unsealed. Of the orphanage in Jakarta that received the first shipment of repurposed medication, once hoarded, now freely distributed. Of lawmakers standing awkwardly together at a bipartisan podium, announcing a unanimous vote on the Global Medical Transparency Pact. His face wasn't even in half the photos, but his shadow was. When the spotlight finally found him, Arnold rose from his seat. No smile, no swagger, just a nod. He walked toward the stage with the calm of a man not performing, but arriving. People didn't clap at first. They just stood, as if the room had remembered something it forgot it owed him. Diane Harrow was seated in the second row. She didn't rise until he passed her. Then she stood, slow and deliberate, and placed her hand over her heart. Arnold reached the podium and waited. Let the hush settle. I'm not here to accept an award, he said plainly. I'm here because a letter from a child reminded me who I was before the lights, before the podiums, before the titles. He pulled the letter from his jacket pocket, held it without unfolding it. This, he said, was written by a boy whose father died believing in a better world. A world that doesn't look away when it's inconvenient. A world that still knows the difference between reputation and honor. He paused. Let it breathe. I don't need a plaque for my wall. I need fewer children burying their heroes. Fewer families learning the truth after the damage is done. You want to honor someone tonight? Honor the whistleblowers, the quiet fighters, the ones who didn't wait for the camera. The applause was slow, not out of hesitation, but reverence. Like people were afraid clapping too soon would break the moment. Backstage, a young staffer wept, not out of sadness, but because, for the first time in her short career, she saw politics act like poetry, like something that healed instead of sold. Arnold stepped down, handed the letter to the girl who had spoken first, whispered something in her ear. She nodded, overwhelmed. And then, as he passed the press gallery, a voice called out, one of the younger reporters. Nervous, naive, honest. Mr. Schwarzenegger, he asked, do you consider this your comeback? Arnold turned, looked the kid straight in the eye. I never left, he said. He kept walking, out into the cold evening air where his car waited with the engine off. He drove himself. No escort, no tinted glass. Just a man with a purpose and a letter, heading home. In the days that followed, News stations aired the clip, not for ratings, but because viewers kept requesting it. It was replayed in classrooms, boardrooms, government offices, translated into over a dozen languages within a week. But Arnold never watched it again. He didn't need to. He already knew what it looked like when silence was finally broken. And this time, the whole world listened.